Hello everyone, Greg Marcy here of Kentucky Small Batch Strings. This is a project I started during the summer of 2020. I am a full-time orchestra teacher for Woodford County Public Schools, where I teach 5th grade through 12th, across the district at 6 schools. After March 13th, our district went to a virtual format of teaching. During my time teaching online, I decided to expand my knowledge on instrument repair. I had been a cabinet maker earlier in life, so I knew some of my skills would transfer. But it wasn't until I got started before I realized how little I knew of the craft. I invite you to come along with me in this series of videos as I demonstrate my continuing education of string instruments. It is with the guidance from my friends at Old Town Violins in Lexington, Kentucky, various other luthiers that I know personally, and the tutelage of Mr. Paul Weissmeyer through the University of New Hampshire's Violin Craftsman Institute that I move forward in my ongoing self-guided study of repair and construction of the violin family of instruments. Let's get started. What the heck? Okay, if you guys don't know what we're looking at here, we're looking at the inside of the top, but my job just got 3 times as hard because not only do I have to repair that crack, that's a carved in bass bar, which is no good. I'm going to have to replace that bass bar. And if you can see all those scratches where it was just rough carved in and not fine carved or scraped down flat, I'm going to have to scrape all that down. This is getting a little bit bigger than what I thought. Not a problem. We'll take our time and muddle through. Actually, this was common practice in violins of this era. Well, I wouldn't say common practice. It was more like, hey, let's skip this step and see if anyone ever notices. It's not like they're going to open it in the next 100 years. I've opened several violins and found the same situation. Carved in bass bar and a rough gouged inside top. This is due to the high demand of string instruments in Europe and America at the time period. Many of these violin makers would outsource their work to other countries just to keep up the demands of the businesses that sold their violins. I once owned a violin that I had to work on with the exact same problems, bass bar and the top. Well, here, let me show you. Whoa, I've never had a flashback before. As you can see, the original bass bar was just carved in, and there are still scratches on the top. When I took the top off, I noticed there were 2 labels stuck together. Curiosity got the best of me and I peeled them apart, and wouldn't you know it, underneath said, copy of an Antonia Stradivarius made in Germany. We'll get started by curing this violin of a little bit of gingivitis before we go. Just scraping some of the dust out of the corners. Now that I have the bass bar out, I'm going to clean the crack out a little bit and just see what kind of damage there is inside of it. There was a lot of glue buildup from the wood glue from an earlier repair someone had done. I think there's a technique I want to try. See how it works. leave this solution in your hair for about 3 days. And then once 3 days is up, you can take this off and lather, rinse, repeat, and put some conditioner in it, and then blow dry it on cool, not on hot, but on cool. And then your hair is going to look fabulous. You wait till you take this head off. Honey, you ain't even going to recognize yourself.
6.5 hours later.
Well, if everything worked right, and I hope it did, that wet paper towel should have loosened up that wood glue pretty well. We'll see here in just a minute. Here's the magic moment to see if this works. If you watch closely, you'll see that glue start to roll right out of that crack. Makes my life a lot easier at this point. It's a lot less scraping I'm going to have to do. All that is dried, well, formerly dried glue. It's become loose, and now I can just rinse it off. It's best to do this from the finished side rather than from the wood side. If you do it from the wood side, the fibers in the wood are going to swell up, and that's going to make it harder to get that joint back together. But as you'll see here in a little bit, that really doesn't matter because we're going to have to get a little bit more extensive with how we attack this crack in the top. Seeing right here is I got a lot of that surface glue off there, but there's still glue in between in the break, which is kind of rubbing together. That's why I really don't like using wood glue on any of this stuff. I mean, some people prefer it, but when it gets in there, it becomes much harder to deal with. So I pretty much got all the glue off the surface, which was on the finish at the top, and I'm trying to get some off the crack, but it's just not working. So what we're going to have to resort to here in a minute is tried and true, putting a piece of sandpaper in and getting some of that glue sanded down, hopefully not taking any of the fibers of the wood. But as I stated in the previous video, we had to do a little bit of splicing in this because the crack had been there for so long that it actually had caused the plates to shrink on both sides just a little bit. So I found that when I was trying to put them back together, that it was falling under the size of the sides. So I had to get a little creative with how I did that. So what I end up doing here in a minute is sanding that down and adding a little piece of wood into there. I'll show you what that's going to look like here. What you may have a hard time seeing in this video is that when I'm squeezing that together, it's causing a lot of stress on the upper bouts. And because of that, I really didn't want to try to wedge that back together with force. So I took off a little bit more from each side, and it started at about 3 millimeters at the saddle down to almost where the marking is at the F-holes where the bridge goes, to nothing, about the width of a summer grain of wood. I added in there just because I didn't want to stress the wood by putting that much force on it trying to get the glue joint to meet, because it would have just come apart again. There was so much stress on it and the plate had shrunk that much. So I'm going to sand it down a little bit more. I'm going to put a clamp on it here in a minute and sand it to make sure the sides are nice and even, and then I'm going to add a sliver of wood. honestly say this experience of working on this violin honed my abilities at using my jack plane, as did taking the course at University of New Hampshire's Violin Craftsman Institute. I learned a lot more there about how to handle your tools and just became much more comfortable using all my hand tools that I had never really used before as a cabinet maker. Alright, you'll see here that I'm gluing my sliver in there. Took a long time to really get that exactly like I wanted it, but now there's no stress on the top. I did a dry fit to see how well it was going to fit on the sides, and it was perfect. I just felt like if I had stressed that top to try to fit together that 2 millimeters it was apart, it would eventually have caused a crack in the upper seam possibly. So I know over time a lot of these woods want to release their stress, and adding stress to wood is never a good idea, especially when it's aged as old as this thing has. So I decided to add that piece of wood in there for that purpose. One thing I learned later on in another fiddle I worked on after this one is I wish I had taken the time to really move the wood as it was setting up. I found that if you're really trying to get that perfect level top, you can do that in certain sections as long as you're using really small controlled moves while the glue is setting up. I really wish I'd taken the care to do that, but like I said, this is a learning experience for me, so I was grateful for the experience afterwards, and I'm looking forward to using it on the next violin that I have to do that with. I decided to mask off those areas because I knew I was going to have to shave off a little bit of that wedge that I had put in there, so didn't want to damage that top any more than it already was. And now comes the cleanup work of the inside. I take down the wedge that I put in with my oval plane, and after I take that down on the inside, I begin to clean up the gouge marks that were left behind by the last maker of this violin. It's kind of satisfying and interesting to know that probably only 2 people have seen the inside of this violin, me and the original maker, however long that was ago. I know these violins aren't very expensive. A lot of times you won't see them in stores or shops for $1,000, maybe $1,500, if that, depending on the quality of the instrument. But historically, I really enjoy working on these. I've purchased a few, and to me they're like time capsules. You open them up and there's history. You'll see dates written in of the last time someone worked on it, and it makes you wonder what was going on, not just in their life, but in the history of mankind during that time. Could have been a war, could have been the Spanish flu. That was their pandemic 100 years ago, back in 1918 to 1920. It makes you respect what you're working on as much more than a musical instrument. It makes you think about the lives of the people who have played it. What type of music did they play? Did this instrument give them hope through tough times? Did it bring joy to others? It's our job as historians of mankind to look after these instruments so they can continue to tell our stories.
Ordering you to obey